Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I See Life, Michael here. Today I'm super excited to bring to you just another great conversation I had with Matt T, Matty Ice T, and we just took a deep dive into the world of the index strategies, how they actually work, how they came up with them. Um, but not only that, the fees, the performance, because unfortunately, when you look at these illustrations, there's a lot of smoke and mirrors, right? There's a lot of performance that's shown as though it were actual performance, but then you realize it's not actual performance. It's not even real, and so you have to know how to kind of look beyond that to make sure you know what you're actually getting. And so this video, just a great deep conversation, pretty much everything you need to know about the index strategies, whether it's an IUL, whether it's a FIA, fixed index annuity, what you need to know and how they work. So guys, like, subscribe, enjoy.
All right, we're live. All right, guys. So I'm actually pretty excited about this video. I think I'm going to learn a lot because Michael here, yeah, you got a lot more experience in the industry than I do, and like, man, just some of the stuff that I've learned from you and just learning overall is just kind of blowing my mind. Like all the conflicting information and stuff. And what we're going to do in this video is break down like an actual spreadsheet of index performance. It's an index performance report. And I think this is, it's not necessarily to say that indexing is bad, because Michael, you and I were talking before we went live here that indexing is actually a really powerful strategy. It's what vehicle are we using in order to take advantage of it? That makes a really big difference. And also, I think it's really important to actually look at real numbers, like real performance when we can, as opposed to something that is illustrated out, like on an IUL, as an example, that shows 6, 7, 8% every single year based on historical averages of a proprietary index that has only existed for 3 years, or if that, right? Which is what a lot of IULs use. And they show these, amazing returns when the index hasn't even existed for very long. But then when we look at indexes that have existed for a while that promised all these great returns, and then when we see those numbers, do they match up with what was illustrated? Sometimes, maybe. A lot of times, it's not. And my problem is, and Michael, I think you'll agree with me, is that when people see those illustrations and they see those numbers and they make potentially life-changing financial decisions and plans around those numbers, and then those numbers don't happen, what are you going to do? What's your plan at that point, right? So I think this is going to be, Michael, he's actually going to go through the entire report. And we're just going to look at some of these actual numbers for these indexes. So, Michael, really appreciate you doing another training with me. This is really good for me. I know it's going to be really good for the audience as well. So give us, I guess, that was kind of my breakdown on what we'll be doing. Let's hear your thoughts. What are we going to be doing today?
Yeah, so today what I want to do is basically break down the indexing strategy. It is a very powerful strategy, right? If you ever read Robert Kiyosaki, he talks about leverage, and leverage is the most important word in financial literacy, right? So what indexing allows you to do is actually leverage and protect your money, right? So if you wanted to say buy in the market, you had $500,000 to invest. If you were to invest all that money into the stock market, all of it would be at risk. Right. And so if the market went down 30%, you would lose $150,000 in that market. But if you were to use an option strategy or an indexing strategy where you bought the call option, maybe you can control the same amount of shares for $10,000. Right. And that's the whole idea, that what these insurance companies are doing with these indexing strategies that they put into fixed index annuities and into IULs, right? And so it's actually a very powerful strategy, because if the market goes down, you can still capture all the upside potential, but now you only have $10,000 at risk, right?
Right.
And the beautiful thing here is that 10,000. Remember, you didn't invest the other 490,000. Right. So what are these insurance companies doing? They're taking that money, they're they're basically making this 10,000 extra because it's all in fixed products, right? It's all in bonds and in mortgages and stuff that is going to be a guaranteed return that they already know, hey, we're going to get 5%,
Right.
and that money's going to be there. So we're not taking any losses using this strategy. So it is a very powerful strategy. It's why I am a big believer in fixed index annuities. But I also want to say that there's a lot of smoke and mirrors that comes along with these illustrations and comes along with choosing a good strategy. So you have to understand like the history of these strategies, right? You have to understand how they work. And so, and I'll tell you how I ended up going down the rabbit hole, Matt. I actually, a while back, I was helping a client, and he wanted to move a good chunk of money. I think in this particular case, it was going to be about $400,000. And I showed him a fixed index annuity through North American. And it was one of these proprietary indexes that looked really great on paper. Remember, in these proprietary indexes, a lot of times they're engineered to look good on paper, but they didn't even exist, right? They're basically picking the winners after the fact, knowing that it's going to look good on paper, right? So
it's like taking a quiz, knowing all the answers to the questions.
Yeah, or going to a horse race and placing your bet after the race is over, right? So I show him this index. Everything looks good. He's actually pretty sold on a lot of things, but he asked me, Michael, when was this index created? Like, what's the true history of this index? And I said, you know what? I don't know. I'll get the answer for you, but let me show you the 20-year history here. And I showed him
the look back
on the 20 years. And the next day, because I did some research, and I had to go and tell him the next day that, hey, actually, this has been in existence about 8 months. There is no history. So if you can imagine
rolling the dice on an index that's 8 months old.
So imagine your client, imagine how embarrassing that was for me.
Sure.
Right. Like showing this great history, looking all good. And then like, well, it's 8 months old.
None of it's real. None of it's real.
But obviously I didn't get that sale, right? Like someone's not going to put $400,000 with me after making a mistake like that. So it's very important to understand where you're putting your money, how these indexes work. And so that's why I want to go ahead and show you the history here, and start with a base of that history, right? Because this is what I had to go through.
I've got hang on, I've got the wrong. I got the wrong screen here. Are you able to? Are you able to share it one more time?
Better.
There we go. Oh, it's because you were still on the StreamYard tab. That's why. I got you.
Got it.
Okay. Yep, we're good. Go ahead. And real quick, I just want to clarify too. This is a report that you got for these, like we're talking about proprietary indexes, meaning these are to clarify, these are indexes that these carriers have created themselves based on like there's certain specific trading strategies or whatever it is that they're doing. They've created them. So it's not like it's the S&P 500 itself. These are created indexes by these carriers. And this report right here is specifically for like fixed income or fixed index annuities. Is that all correct?
Yeah. So this is all the fixed index annuities, all the indexes within the annuities that Advisors Excel uses. So Advisors Excel is a high level brokerage firm. They do everything: investments, insurance, Medicare, stuff like that. They won't even consider you unless you have $5 million in your book of business to even join them, right? So it's not something that anybody can join. But yeah, they use these to give people or give their advisors a history, right, of how have these indexes actually performed? When was their live date, right? Who's performing well? And so what I want to do real quick, and I'm going to correct you a little bit here, Matt. These are actually not, if I can pull up trying to find one. Actually, let's use this that we covered last week. right? We did a video on National Life Group.
Yeah.
And what I want to show you here is these index strategies are not, they're not created by the insurance company, right?
Okay.
So if you look here, this is a National Life Group Living Life Defender.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the U.S. Pace Setter, right? Now the U.S. Pace Setter, by the way, on paper will show over 10% double-digit returns, and the actuality is they've performed negatively since their existence. But let me read this real quick so you
That's
understand.
crazy.
The U.S. Pacesetter Index is the exclusive proprietary property of SG America's Securities. So it's
Okay.
not National Life Group, right?
Okay. Gotcha.
Now,
It's just
SG,
National Life Group using this specific index that this company has made
right, right.
to try to outperform the market or get the highest returns possible.
So what they do is they all these indexes are volatility indexes. What they try to do is they limit the volatility uh, within the index. So any stock that's volatile, usually like 5%, they will take it out, right? And the reason they do this is because volatility is drives options costs up.
Right.
Because when you understand options, they're kind of like insurance, right? You're protecting your money. Same thing with not just call options, but put options too, right? You're saying I can guarantee my sale at this price. If the market drops, no worries. I have a contract that says I can still sell at this price. So it's basically insurance for your portfolio. You know, you have to understand that it's insurance for your portfolio to understand that like it's not really like about making money, right? Like it's the more volatility is why it costs more because there's more chance that it goes up and down. So you have to pay more premium, right? It's kind of like in life insurance. The more risky you are with your health, the more you're going to pay in premium.
Sure.
So what they're trying to do is they're trying to lower those costs as much as possible. So they try to take all the volatility out. Now it's kind of a counterintuitive because remember, volatility is what you need to capture gains.
Sure.
So,
It works on both sides. You need that because like the index could the S&P, for example, it could move a lot. But
yeah,
if you if uh if you're in this type of index that limits all the volatility, that is going to have an impact on the upside of that option just as much as it would on the cost of the option if you were to purchase it up front, like when you implement the strategy. So you need that volatility for the upside potential in the call options as well.
right. And if you need any proof of this because you don't understand, just look at a company like Tesla, that high volatility, their options cost a lot versus if you were to look at a company like
Right.
Visa, right? So
Right.
that volatility is how you capture those gains. You need the volatility, so it goes up and down. But yeah, it's just the way they do it. So yeah, it does limit, and that's what we're going to show you today.
Okay.
Why I'm not a big fan of those indexes, right? So, but this is important to understand too. So it's owned by SG America's Securities in this case, and then it says SG has contracted with S&P Opco LLC to maintain and calculate the index. So
Right.
that's two companies involved here that are not National Life Group,
Okay.
right? Now, Matt, how many companies do you know that work for free?
I don't know any. No, none come to mind.
I don't know any either, right? And so that's important to understand too. Is all these indexes come with fees, where the S&P they just have to pay like 3 basis points for the licensing, because S&P takes care of itself. But with these indexes, they got to pay the company that owns it or created it, and they got to pay the one who manages it.
Sure.
And
And
so,
that all gets passed on to the consumers,
absolutely,
I would imagine.
yep,
And that's not necessarily the end of the world. That's capitalism. That's fine. I don't really have an issue with. I mean, fees are fees. Like we pay fees with everything. But are the fees worth it? Like, are they justified? Maybe in some cases,
right.
but it's hard to tell on an index that has only existed for a few years, as we're going to see with these live dates on a lot of these indexes. They haven't been around long enough to really know if they're going to perform the way they're illustrated, or whatever the fees are, if that's worth it. Like, we just don't know. You're kind of rolling the dice and assuming that it's going to do what's being illustrated, and you're assuming that it's going to do the same thing that it's done over the past 30 years, even though it didn't exist.
Right. The other thing I want to say too is you have a lot of the newer insurance agents that are trying to push IUL and things like that, and they're bashing on the 401k for having fees, which is true. Like, the 401k fees can be outrageous, 2, 3, 4%. But then they go and they want to put them in a product that is going to have fees very similar, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, you can't bash on that for having the fees and then put them in a product where there's a cost of insurance and there's other risks now involved. Plus, you have to borrow the money at cost, and you still have the same fees. So,
yeah. But their argument would be that you have that 0% floor, versus the 401k, you're taking that hit if the market comes down, as opposed to an indexing strategy, whether it's IUL or fixed index annuity, whatever, you have that 0% floor.
Right. But remember, there's two vehicles here. So you can use a fixed index annuity, which is going to get the job done every single time because there's no cost of insurance, right? The money's protected. You still have the upside potential. But on the other side, if you go into an IUL, you have the cost of insurance. Remember, in fixed index annuities, you don't have to borrow the money to get it. You're going to take it as a distribution. It's your money. Whereas in the IUL, you're going to have compounding interest against you.
Right. You're taking the policy loans.
You're borrowing, right? And so that's going to continue to compound against you. So there's a ton more risk in the IUL versus an FIA when it comes to this strategy.
Right.
Like I said, I'm big on the FIAs. It's like, same strategy. They're completely identical strategies, but two completely different vehicles, right? And the vehicle is what introduces the risk or doesn't have risk.
That makes sense.
But I want to read this real quick. So SG deducts a maintenance fee, 50 basis points per annum on the level of the index and the fixed transaction and replication costs, each calculated and deducted on a daily basis. So there's the 50 basis points plus the transaction and replication costs. The transaction and replication costs cover, among other things, rebalancing and replication costs. The total amount the transaction and replication costs is not predictable and will depend on a number of factors, including the leverage of the index, which may be as high as 200%, right? So these costs typically are going to end up between 1.5% and 3%, just so you know. I'll take nationwide because I actually know exactly what their costs are. Their actual costs are about 1.85%. Meanwhile, they're going to charge the client 2.7%. And the reason they do this is because these costs do fluctuate. So if those costs went from 8.5 to 2.2, they don't have to go to the client and say, hey, we increased costs. Like, it's already
factored in. And you can read right there, the transaction and replication costs, which are increased by the index's leverage, and the maintenance fee will reduce the potential positive change in the index and increase the potential negative change in the index. Now, look, guys, I've done a lot of videos now on IUL and stuff like that. You guys know that I'm not a huge fan, but I would never tell somebody to never buy an IUL. I just want you guys to read the fine print. And when you start to read these things and understand how they work, you start to put the pieces of the puzzle together to the point where you can make an educated financial decision on whether or not this makes sense for you. But the more you read this stuff and the more you learn how these things actually work, are you willing to roll the dice with these kinds of things with your financial future just for a few extra potential percentage points as compared to like a high cash value dividend paying whole life insurance policy? I don't know. Not for me. Might be for you. But like when I read that, that's a red flag to me. It's going to increase the negative impact and it's going to reduce the positive impact. Like that in and of itself is not necessarily a deal breaker. You just need to know that because that's not the only red flag in these types of policies. You just need to know exactly what you're putting your money into.
Right.
Go ahead, Michael. Just wanted a side note right there because when I read it, I was like, wow, okay, yeah, that's That's important to know. that's
Yeah.
you need to know that stuff.
So what I actually do, Matt, is I sell these fixed index annuities. I don't show illustrations anymore because, especially on the annuity side, you don't have AG49, AG49A, B. Um, there's really no regulation on the illustration. These companies are showing insane returns, 15%, even 24%.
That's crazy.
And they're not even realistic, right?
Yeah, that's so
Um,
wild, man.
it's insane. But what I want to do is break it down between you have your S&P options, which pretty much every company, that's the foundation, right? You have an
Sure.
S&P option, it's normally capped, and then you have the proprietary uncapped indexes um, in the policy, right? So, and that's true for both IUL and for FIAs. Um, so they both work the same. So what I want to show you is we start to look at the 10-year history. And Matt, I want you to look for 6% with at least 5 years that are not the S&P, NASDAQ, or Dow, right?
Okay.
So you see we have a 13% right here, the third column or
Mm-hmm.
third row, but look at the live date.
Right.
It's
2021.
it's 3 years old, right? There's
3 years.
super history there. And we look down and we're like 4, 3, 2, negative 1, 3, right? Okay, here we go. Here's an 8. So this is from Barclays, and it has about 10 years. So that's a legit index,
That's not.
right?
Yeah, that's not too bad.
That's not too bad.
I'd say 8% over 10 years. That's pretty good.
Here's the Barclays Trailblazer, 2.63. So you look, some of these just say NA. I mean, they don't have the 10-year history.
Right.
Sometimes they show a 10-year look back, but then you see the live date and it's like, oh, well.
I was going to say, because some of them are only a couple years old, but they're in the 10-year column there.
Right. So I want you to see how many indexes there are on this page, and only one meets the requirement. Right.
Yeah.
And we continue on, and you see 3s, 4s, 1s. There's an 8, but 2023. So it's less than a year old. Right.
Right.
Here's one. It's almost 5 years. Right. 6.67 or 6.9. But think about it. It's not even 7%. And people are trying to say that you're going to be getting these great returns, 7% and up. And you see how hard it is to find an index that's actually performing, right? 2s, 3s, there's another 6, but doesn't meet the 5-year history.
Yeah.
There's a 5%. And the reason I show you this, and I want people to see this, this is the Dow Jones, by the way. So 1896, 8.5%. But we start looking.
Real quick, Michael. So there's, again, just pointing things out. Okay. When you look at the Dow Jones Industrial Average, so scroll back up really quick, go back to that Dow Jones Industrial. All right. So that's the Dow Jones. Okay. What's interesting is in the second column is 2022. So if we look at one given year, okay, the Dow Jones in that particular year down 8.78%. Like that's the actual Dow Jones right there, right?
Right.
But if you look at some of these other indexes, like for example, that one that you just pointed out that had the 6.7%, the CIBC Balanced Asset 10 Index, that was down 20% in 2022. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought this was supposed to be a volatility index that reduced the possibility of that type of scenario. So it was actually down more than the overall market itself, if talking about the Dow Jones in that particular example.
And you're going to have both up and down years, even trying to control volatility that you can't really control. What we want to really establish is more the nature of the index instead of trying to focus on one particular year. Because any given year, an index can shoot up, right?
Sure. And the flip side of it could be, the Dow Jones is up 8.78%, but then that index is up 20%. the reverse scenario could be the case. I just find it interesting because like when I hear volatility index, I think less risk against a potential downside move. Maybe that's not the case though.
Yeah, and what I'm trying to establish here is you have a nature to all these other indexes, the indices, right? Um, and the nature and the pattern seems to be they perform about 2 to 4%.
Yeah.
Right? Is that pretty obvious when you look at these charts?
Yeah, when you're looking at the last 10 years, yeah,
Yeah,
for sure.
right. And so if you understand, okay, these are going to perform 2 to 4%, and we have the Dow, which is 8.5. Let's find the NASDAQ here. The NASDAQ 16%, NASDAQ 100, and the S&P almost 10%, right? And look at the histories, right? Like 1957, 9.94%. So when you're looking as an investor and you're like looking to at the fundamentals and you're looking at, hey, what would be a good place to put my money? It's pretty obvious that, you know, if the S&P option is there, which it is in most cases, that's where you're going to go, right? I like the NASDAQ option, but it's hard to find. It's out there, but it's hard to find. Like most products do not have the NASDAQ 100, right? Most products do have the S&P. So what I'm trying to get at is with the S&P, it's capped, yes, but it's going to be very consistent.
Yeah, it's more reliable, more consistent.
It's reliable, right?
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, you're kind of going to get the 2 to 4% on the other indexes, but you're kind of hoping for that home run, right? Like
right.
It's uncapped. So there are cases where people have gotten 40%, 50%. It does happen.
And that's like a 3 year, 2 or 3 year annual or 3 year point to point.
Not necessarily even that. Like sometimes it is that, right? But when COVID happened, right, the market came down, and the people that got in the index right when the market dropped and then it shot right back up, those people had a great year, right? Some of those people did get 50% just because of the timing of the market, right? It's not because it was a fundamentally good choice. Just the timing was right? It's kind of like if you own GameStop, if you're an investor, like GameStop is not a great company you want to invest in, but people made a lot of money in GameStop a few years ago, right?
Sure.
So it's kind of like that, right? Sometimes you get lucky. And here's what I would say, Matt. If you're looking at a fixed index annuity, a vehicle that has very little risk, you could take your chances a little bit more, right? Trying to hit that home run,
right?
Because you don't have that downside risk, right? Now in an IUL, where you become dependent on the market gains and there's costs and there's risk associated, do you want to strike out trying to hit that home run, or do you want to just go with the S&P and make sure your policy is growing?
Right.
You see what I'm saying?
That would make more sense to me, even though you're capped. You know, when you see something that is uncapped, that doesn't automatically equate to it being better, or like you gotta look at what that index is. How long has it been around? Are we making assumptions here based on something that hasn't existed for a very long time? You know, and you need to know that so you can make the best decision for you. And, you know, if you're somebody that wants to roll the dice on that, fine, go for it. But know what you're getting into, right? So
right. And keep in mind, you might have extra high par rates, especially in the beginning years of your policy. They're always going to inflate the cap rates, the par rates in the beginning. And then typically a lot of these companies, what they'll do is they'll lower it after the first year, right? So in that first year, let's say you're getting a 250, 300% participation rate, and it is an FIA, you might want to take some of your money and put it in the volatility index where it's uncapped and see what happens, right? Just because of the nature and with the extra par rate. But remember, if you get on the upper end 4% on the average, you know, even 300% is only 12%. So it's not some extraordinary return unless it gets you like 10, 15% that particular year. And then you might have 30, 45%. So Like I said, it goes against the nature, but it's kind of like hitting that home run, right? And you can take those chances more in a product like a fixed index annuity, whereas an IUL, when you do have, that cost of insurance and policy fees and borrowing costs,
Yeah.
not exactly where you want to take the risk, right? So you
Right.
want something more sure. And the S&P does provide that history.
Yeah. I got
So,
you. That's interesting. Because I've seen illustrations where, with these proprietary indexes showing just amazing returns, and it's not really based on anything. And my frustration is when people make decisions based on that, that can cause a lot of problems later on down the road when that policy does not perform as you expected. And this report here shows what these indexes are doing. A lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them are doing, regardless of if it's an annuity or IUL, doesn't really matter. The indexing, like indexing is indexing, right? With these proprietary uh, indexes, right?
right.
So it's just important to understand that when you see an illustration, doesn't mean that's what's going to happen. Okay. Especially when it's based on the performance of a market index. It's just, it's just something to really think about, guys. That's all. So,
Yeah.
with that said, was there anything else you want to go through on this report or about indexing in general? Have
Not
we covered
particularly.
most of everything?
We covered pretty much the nature.
Yeah.
What I would
So,
say is, Tony Robbins wrote a book, Money Master the Game, where he talks about mutual funds and how 96% do not perform, do not beat the S&P 500. Right? People are just not good at predicting the future. They're not good at picking stocks, and so these proprietary indexes are a look back where they pick stocks looking back, but they didn't actually happen, right?
right.
And so the 2 to 4% that you see as a pattern here, when you understand that 96% don't beat the market, like now you start to understand, like actually that makes a lot of sense, right? What's true of mutual funds is true of these indexes too. They're
Sure.
not going to, there will be some that maybe 4% that do beat the market, but overall, I mean, just the nature of it, 96%, I'd say are not going to beat the S&P 500.
Yeah. It's interesting.
So, yeah. So if I'm looking at an index annuity, I'm trying to find the best cap rates on the S&P,
Sure. Because
right?
what the S&P, like the S&P has been around a long time.
Yeah.
You got an idea of what to expect on average from the S&P, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's the other thing that's important to know, especially with the fixed index annuities, is the participation rates, the cap rates, because I do see a lot of agents make this mistake. They will sell these bonuses that companies offer, right? And the companies offer these bonuses. It's not bonuses to your cash value in almost 100%. I won't say 100% because there are some, but most of these are what's called benefit value. So they'll say, oh, we'll give you a 20% bonus. I've even seen as high as 45% bonus, but that's to the benefit value, which affects your income
Right.
and it affects your death benefit. Now, on the income, typically they're not the best income either, but they usually come at a cost, right? So
Sure.
they come at a cost when your par rates and your cap rates go down, they stunt your growth. And what they do is they inflate your benefit bonus because if you walk away, you only get your cash value. The only way to get the benefit bonus is to die or use it as income. So it's actually a way to kind of trap you into the product and marry you to that company, because to walk away, you'd have to give up all the benefit,
Sure.
right? And typically they'll give you like a 200% multiplier on the benefit. So your benefit value is also growing at twice the rate of your cash value plus the bonus. And I know I've seen a lot of agents sell it. And I'm like, why would you do that? You're giving your clients like 50% participation, like, or small participation rates. And so we could do a whole nother video on that, Matt, but
Yeah.
it's like, man, you got to know what you're getting into. If you want the best cap rates and par rates, You want to go without the income rider, without the bonus, without the base benefit, just straight accumulation. That's what's going to get the job done most.
Yeah, so as far as income goes, later on down the road too. So, yeah, I think the biggest takeaway for me with these things is that when you see like specific terms like these bonuses and proprietary index and uncapped and no or I don't know what you call it with participation rates, but no limit on. Well, there's always a limit on participation rates, but I'm saying like these things that they make it sound a lot better than it actually is. I'm not saying that they're not good, but there's usually a cost to it. There's something else that they're giving you this one thing, but they're taking something else away on the back end.
No free lunch.
Yeah, exactly. Like these companies are in business to make money. They're not giving away free money to you. All right. So you need to understand what those things are. That's that's the biggest takeaway for me. And then also just using common sense, like, an index that was started in 2022, 2 years ago. Like, do I want to roll the dice on my retirement on something like that just because it's uncapped? No, not really. So, at the end of the day, guys, just understand these things, do your research. All right. Ask the hard questions to your agent. When you watch videos like this, take this information, whatever agent you're working with, ask them about this and see what they say. It's it's going to reveal a lot. Okay, so I'll go ahead and with that. That's my final contribution here. Anything else that you want to finish up with, Michael?
No, I agree 100%. You got to ask the questions. You got to get to the bottom of things. I'm pretty sure that's what that client did. He had an advisor who told him what questions to ask.
Yep.
And yeah, it tripped me up, right?
Yep.
And it caused me to be better though, right?
Sure.
And so when you do make these mistakes, I'll say this: if you're an agent, you make those kind of mistakes, don't look at them as bad things. We all we all lost a deal that could have been $5,000-$10,000 or even more, and we blew it because of a mistake that we made. But those are some of the best, most valuable times because we get to learn and we get to do the research and be better next time around. Right.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
So that's what pushed me to really dive into the history of how these indexes work, what the actual histories are, when they started, and really just become an expert in this field, because I realized I wasn't.
All right. Don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
So always keep learning, guys. So
absolutely.
That was good stuff, Michael. I really appreciate you sharing this with me because I like seeing like actual numbers and performance for these things. Numbers speak louder than anything we can say. When we're talking about this, I could tell people all day long, don't put your money in these proprietary indexes, like, because they haven't been around that long. And like, to me, that makes sense. But until you really see the numbers, like the numbers just hit home a little bit differently. So I appreciate you sharing this with me. I think it's really valuable, and look forward to the next one, man.
Yeah, definitely. Pleasure always, Matt.
All right. You too. We'll talk soon.
Sounds good.
Bye.